Hello and welcome to the fourth in a series being hosted by the Bipartisan Policy Center, the National Association of Counties, and the National League of Cities, exploring implementation issues around the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. We're thrilled today to be talking about water infrastructure. But before we jump into our discussion, we're going to turn it over to Clarence Anthony, the CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities, for a few opening remarks.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. I'm Clarence Anthony, CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning for this hybrid event today. For those of you online, it's great to see you virtually. And for those of you joining us in person in Washington, D.C., I wish I was there, but I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico today at a meeting. On behalf of NLC, the National Association of Counties, and the Bipartisan Policy Center, I am so excited to welcome you to today's program, Implementing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law with the EPA. This is the fourth event in a series that we are calling Overcoming Challenges and Seizing Opportunities, Implementing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And we're so glad you're able to join us for this session today. Today's conversation is focused on water infrastructure, specifically how states, cities, and counties can effectively work with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to take advantage of the $50 billion in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law dedicated to water resources. Investments in our water infrastructure systems can't wait much longer. From lead water line replacement to stormwater management, cities and counties face a long list of water infrastructure challenges at staggering cost. But I'm thrilled to say that some of those needs are finally being met. This infrastructure law includes the single largest investment in water resources ever made by the federal government. A great start to the kind of changes needed to transform our water infrastructure for the long term. In partnership with EPA, it's time for all of us to buckle down and get to work repairing our sewers, making our water systems more resilient and climate smart, reducing contamination, preparing for cyber threats related to water, and so much more. And we've got to do it equitably and with affordability in mind too, ensuring that disadvantaged communities with environmental justice concerns, low-income communities, and communities of color equally benefit from these critical investments that are being made today. Small and rural communities in particular struggle with meeting and dealing with the affordability of the water infrastructure needs. And we must make sure that we bring those places along as well. As a former mayor in a rural small city, I know firsthand about trying to make sure that the quality of the water and the infrastructure is developed in a way that all residents get quality and affordable water. Partner with EPA to get these projects done is a big part of how we will build a better climate-ready America that addresses the needs of all of our residents together. So today is very important that all of us focus, take notes, and then partner with EPA to make sure that we're working effectively and efficiently. It's my privilege to welcome a special guest from the federal government, Karen Dettmer, Managing Director for Infrastructure Implementation at EPA, to speak to us today and to share this important information so that, again, that we can take it back. For those that are city and county folks joining us, you'll be excited that Karen's a local leader herself. Karen hails from Milwaukee, where she was interim public works director before being appointed to her new role and position implementing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in EPA's Office of Water. And now Karen's doing a great job working with the Biden administration to ensure that we create better and safer water infrastructure that benefits everyone in every community throughout America. We're in for such a great treat today with our conversation with Karen and with my colleagues at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Karen, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm gonna turn the floor over to you. You guys have a good session.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Those great remarks, Clarence. I will turn it over to Karen in just a second, but a quick reminder for those of you watching us online, you can put questions in YouTube or Facebook or on Twitter using #BPC Live. We do have a few folks here in the room, so we'll take some live audience questions as well. Karen, take it away.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. As Clarence mentioned, I hail from local government. I spent 15 years working for the city of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, most recently as the public works director, but substantially as the superintendent or executive director of Milwaukee Waterworks, which is a drinking water utility serving 860,000 a population of 860,000 in Milwaukee and 15 surrounding communities. So when I was approached to come to the EPA Office of Water, it was very bittersweet for me because I love being part of the boots on the ground, the people that are getting the work done, interacting with communities, interacting with residents and community-based organizations, and making sure that I stayed close to the work. So it was a little bit difficult for me to walk away from that, but the opportunity to bring my knowledge that from working in that drinking water utility on a national scale to inform the implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was something I certainly could not pass up. I think it is so substantial that our Assistant Administrator, Radhika Fox, and our Administrator, Michael Regan, have compiled a team in the Office of Water that really represents the needs of communities, of states, and of local organizations. Myself, coming from the city of Milwaukee, we have Wendy Wilkes, a senior advisor who came from ASWA, so she understands to a T the state partnerships. Jonathan Nelson, who is in Alabama right now, and I'll get into a little more detail about that, with Administrator Regan and Assistant Administrator Fox. He comes from an environmental finance center, really close to the work on technical assistance. And Zach Schaefer, a senior advisor with our group, comes from an infrastructure background. So really compiled a great level of expertise. And of course, local communities are a part of that.
Great. Well, why don't I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then, like I said, we'll turn to the audience questions. So the BIF, or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law now, I guess, includes the single largest investment in water infrastructure ever for the federal government, including over $50 billion to EPA's Office of Water. Those of us who have been in water policy for years, it's a huge amount of money and very much needed. But so while the nation's drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater needs are immense, can you put into perspective what you think that funding can achieve if invested wisely, and how far will the infrastructure funding go towards providing affordable drinking water and wastewater services?
Absolutely. So $50 billion. Wow, it's huge. And such a great responsibility too, because we know that a great influx in water infrastructure investment can help so many around the nation, and we want to make sure that we're doing it right. So the majority of that $50 billion is going out to states first from the EPA, and then out to communities through the state revolving fund programs, either drinking water or clean water SRFs. And for the first time ever, we have dedicated funding that's going to emerging contaminants through the SRF program in both clean water and drinking water. So we're really excited about that. And for the first time ever, we have $15 billion going toward a dedicated funding source for lead service line replacement. Huge, huge opportunity for so many communities to get their inventory started in preparation of the lead and copper rule revisions that will go into effect in 2024, and to really get that replacement program started for lead service line replacements, as well as improve programs, improve programs that they already have in place. So we're so excited about that substantial opportunity. Coming from Milwaukee, lead service lines, it's a community of about a little less than 70,000 lead service lines in the city of Milwaukee, serving commercial and residential properties. And that influx of cash is going to help Milwaukee, who has a very proactive and robust program already, really increase the number of lead service lines they can replace on an annual basis. Such needed federal investment into these communities that have been in compliance with the lead and copper rule and haven't necessarily had that dedicated funding source available to them. So we're really excited about that. As far as $50 billion, yes, we're amazed and we're grateful and we're so excited for that influx of money. But we need more money. We need more money on an annual basis for water infrastructure. It pales in comparison to the federal investment in road infrastructure, as an example. And we have reports, we have information, various estimates, some along the lines of $3 trillion that are needed for water infrastructure. And we know that more is needed. So part of the task that we're undertaking is ensuring that we are getting the funding out, but we are getting the funding out appropriately so that communities can put some investment into their water infrastructure and build that pipeline of projects that they need moving forward. In the example of lead service line replacements, many communities will be using that first year of funding to build up their inventories. States will be helping communities with their set-asides for that funding to build community community inventories. So we want to make sure that that is moving forward so that states in year 2 can get more of that funding out for actual replacement programs, and then build that program as time moves on, show that the need is there, and get more funding on an annual basis to water infrastructure investments.
Great reminder that it really is just a drop in the bucket for what the nationwide needs are. And I know a lot of us who work in this space, you get frustrated when people talk about infrastructure, they immediately assume you're talking about roads because the pipes are not seen. But it really is a critical part of both the infrastructure and the nation's public health. So it's nice to see that investment.
Not seen until they break.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a traffic issue. Yes.
Right.
But as I mentioned, this is the 4th in our series. The other folks who've come in, including FEMA and the permitting agency, have talked about some of the issues that they're going to have to overcome. I mean, obviously, this is a lot of money to get out the door quickly. What are some of the challenges you think you're going to have in terms of implementation, and is there a plan in place what's the plan to try and overcome some of that?
So we're working on the plan on a regular, we have a plan, we're working on more plans, and we're planning all through this first Biden administration. And part of that plan has been laid out for us, right? We have the lead paint and pipe plan that the Biden-Harris administration has put out, and we're following that closely, working toward an end goal of 100% replacement, and working backwards of where do we need to start now with the inventories, as I mentioned. But we also know that because the funding is through existing programs, we're already hitting, we're already well served, we're well positioned to get that funding out as quickly as possible. But we also have new priorities: equity, climate impacts, job creation, that we want to ensure states, when they're choosing projects and communities to get that funding out to, are keeping in mind. So we put out a Bipartisan Infrastructure Law State Revolving Fund Implementation Memo, the Bill SRF Implementation Memo, in March of this year. And that really is a great guidance document for states and communities to identify which projects to prioritize, and give some information on how they can prioritize those projects. We also know that the administrative needs are significant at the EPA. I mentioned the team of bill focused, bipartisan infrastructure law focused individuals that have been hired recently. But we have about 300 new hires that need to happen across the EPA here in headquarters in Washington, but also in many of our regions, because those are the individuals that are really working closely with the states to make sure that that funding is going out. So that's a heavy lift. The amount of administrative work in the EPA is a pretty heavy lift, and just getting those people on board and up to speed to ensure that they know how to help the states and answer the questions and help communities that we're dealing directly with and answer those questions. Significant lift, but we're full speed ahead on that. But most importantly, we want to make sure that communities who have not previously had access to this funding have access to the funding. So Clarence talked about small and rural communities, and those small and rural communities may not have the capacity to apply for a loan from the state. They may not even be aware that this funding pot exists to help them with their water infrastructure needs. So we're doing direct technical assistance outreach to small and rural communities, as well as disadvantaged communities. We have a direct mandate from Congress in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to put 49% of the clean water and drinking water SRF funding, as well as 49% of the lead service line replacement funding, to disadvantaged communities. And those definitions are set by the state. But we have a great report out that talks about the definition of disadvantaged communities, as well as some guidance in our implementation memo that I mentioned that states can look at to reevaluate their definition of disadvantaged communities, perhaps expand that definition or adjust that definition so they can ensure they can best utilize that 49% of SRF funding that's required to go to disadvantaged communities as grants or principal forgiveness loans. Free money for infrastructure projects. What a great opportunity.
Great, and that's critically important because we know a lot of those communities have not been able to access fund. Well, they just haven't really known how to get to it, and so any outreach being done there is a great step forward. But as you mentioned, there's thousands upon thousands of water systems across the country. There's a wide range of potential recipients. They very large in size and technical expertise. So can you speak a little bit more about how you're going to ensure that they have the technical, managerial, and financial capacity? Like, what are the on-the-ground programs, and do you have partners that you're working with to make sure that funding gets to them?
Absolutely. So we have put out requests for applications for about $100 million from environmental finance centers. So that is from the EPA's set aside of the bill funding, and that is going out directly to environmental finance centers across the nation for regional approaches, but also for the first time ever on a national, on a nationwide perspective. So there will be national environmental finance centers that can assist communities across the nation, and we expect those environmental finance centers to also talk to each other and share best practices and some of the challenges that they're seeing moving forward. So really excited about that opportunity. We have 3 different new technical assistance pilot programs. One is actually being announced right now at this very moment. Secretary Vilsack from the USDA is joining our administrator, Michael Regan, and Assistant Administrator Radhika Fox in Alabama, Lowndes County, Alabama, today. They're right there at this very moment doing a press release. And some of you may have seen in Lowndes County about a year ago, there was a report from the New York Times about their just immense lack of access to wastewater systems and sewage in people's front yards. I mean, just astonishing conditions, a huge public health issue in these communities that just did not have access to proper wastewater treatment. And today, they're in Lowndes County because President Biden had read that article a year ago, and it really had an impact on the need to move forward to help these communities that needed it most, that had no access to funding. So they're there today. The White House Infrastructure Coordinator, Mitch Landrieu, is joining them as well to make this announcement that 11 communities that have been identified in the greatest need for wastewater access will be given technical assistance and targeted technical assistance directly from the EPA to close that wastewater access gap. That's the name of the program, Closing the Wastewater Access Gap. So excited that that is moving forward today. There's a New York Times article already out this morning about that program, and we're just really excited that, here was this issue. We saw it as a great issue, and the amount of work that our team, our Office of Wastewater Management Technical Assistance team has been putting into this project is just immense. And it's so exciting that it's coming to fruition today. In addition to that, we have, and we'll be announcing this later this summer and fall, a project called the H2o Community Solutions pilot. So that we have identified, I can't announce it today, but we have identified about 30 communities, 3 from each region, that we will be working directly with the states, communities that need assistance, technical assistance for their projects, drinking water and clean water projects, a wide variety of projects. But the community needs are very specific. And so we're unrolling this program that will be a targeted technical assistance directly to those communities to design a program to get them to build the capacity, identify what project needs to be done, and set them up for success in applying for those SRF funds to fund the project moving forward. Third and final that will be coming out this fall, we are working with 4 states. Again, I can't announce them today, but there will be an announcement coming. We're working with 4 states that have lead service line replacement programs in varying stages across their states. And those 4 states will be providing technical assistance to them and identifying communities within those states that need technical assistance, as I mentioned, either to identify and prepare a lead service line inventory, or perhaps build up their replacement program through workforce development. So we have some great partners, federal partners there, USDA today on the Closing the Wastewater Access Gap, and working with labor unions and the Department of Labor on the technical assistance lead service line replacement accelerator project.
That's all great.
A lot.
There's a lot going on, and I was really happy to hear about the project, the work in Alabama, because there's still communities in the United States who don't have access to clean water and sewer services, and it shouldn't be that way. So it's nice to know that we have those resources out there. So the SRF really is it is a model for this federal, state, local partnership. It works incredibly well. And so we recently had FEMA Deputy Administrator Eric Hooks here, and he mentioned that he was going to reach out or wanted to talk with EPA about the administration of those SRFs, because they have a new revolving loan fund. So do you have any challenges or success stories that you'd recommend FEMA kind of be on the lookout for as they roll out it's called the Safeguarding Tomorrow Revolving Loan Fund Program?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've had our state revolving loan programs for a number of years, and I think the biggest success that we hear directly from states and from our regions is really the flexibility of the program. So the funding comes from the EPA through formula that is in the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. It's congressionally directed, that funding formula. And but while we have rules and regulations and laws that the states have to follow in putting out that funding to communities, there's a wide range of flexibility. And what we hear most, and what I experienced when I was in Milwaukee, and we used the state revolving fund in Wisconsin, almost exclusively to fund water main replacement projects, because it's so cheap. The funding is so cheap. It has to go out as as subsidized, so below market rate funding. And as I mentioned, with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding, we have 49% of it that has to go out as grants or principal forgiveness loan for, the loans are forgiven. So having that flexibility for the states, we see states that are very successful in putting funding out at, just below market. Some states have a tiered approach where if it's a highest priority project or it's a smaller rural community, they'll do that at 30% of the market rate, or if it's not as high of a priority and the affordability metrics aren't quite there, they'll do 50% of the market rate. So a wide range. We're hearing from some states with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding, because it's such a huge influx in funding, that some states are putting it out at 0.01% or 0%. The whole premise behind this funding is to get the projects done, but also to get the loans repaid so that more projects can get done, right? So certainly, we have a lot of lessons learned. We have good examples of what hasn't worked well with certain states, and where states are sometimes, and I'm not going to name names, but where states are sometimes kind of working against themselves because they're identifying other loan funding or other grant funding that may compete with the loans. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about how difficult it is to apply for one of these state revolving fund loans. And that's why we want to get that technical assistance out to people. We want to make sure that they understand that there is assistance, there is help. We can provide, and many states have technical assistance programs to provide that capacity to small and rural communities, to disadvantaged communities, to prepare that loan application. So there are a lot of myths out there too that we need to push people on.
And so one more call for audience questions. I'm going to turn to those in just a second. So folks in the room, or if you're following us online, you can submit those through the chat or hashtag BPC Live on Twitter. So you had already alluded to or mentioned several of the small, so the SRFs are obviously the big one, but there's a lot of smaller programs within the bill, as we're calling it now. And so you also mentioned this isn't it. We're going to need additional funding. And so you're going to have some folks up on the Hill in particular saying, well, we just gave you $50 billion. Why do you need more? But we're going to learn a lot of lessons from how you're putting that funding out that are going to show where there's more need, et cetera. So what do you hope we'll learn through the implementation of those more targeted programs, and how might they help inform the federal decision-making process going forward?
Yeah, that is a great question. And we are documenting and tracking. Speaking of the SRF programs, we put out the recommendation that states reevaluate their definition of disadvantaged communities to be able to fully utilize all that funding. And we are closely tracking. We now have 21 states that have either changed their definition of disadvantaged community for the Drinking Water Fund, or are contemplating it, or are planning for it because it's a legislative process in the state. And we're so ecstatic about that. We thought, maybe in the first year we'd see 1 or 2 states change, but 21 states are changing their definition of disadvantaged communities. Some of the other programs, and particularly the technical assistance programs that I mentioned, we need to gather that information and identify where we're seeing the successes and how we're seeing the successes. We're not sure that any of these pilot programs are really going to work. I mean, we're pretty certain because we've done a lot of evaluation and we've talked to the states and the communities, but it may not look exactly like we've designed them right now. So every step along the way, we're identifying the successes, we're celebrating them, we're ensuring that they're replicable so that more communities can access that funding. And through that, we are going to have more people knocking on the door. We're going to have, you're all from communities. We're going to have your neighbors listen to your success stories in, forums or just talking through county interactions. And those success stories are going to gain more interest as well. We are looking, the H2o Community Solutions pilot program, where we are directly getting technical assistance to small and rural communities across the country. Those 30 projects are going to expand to 60 communities in the near future. And we're already preparing that list because we know there's such a great need out there. So as every step along the way, as we're getting the funding out, we're looking ahead to how this particular success can be replicable to other communities throughout the country that may need a similar assistance.
Great. So now I was going to turn to audience questions, and I promise I'm not looking at my phone in the middle of a live event, but I'm getting the questions texted to me, so I don't want people to think I'm being rude. Why don't we start with anyone here in the room? Do we have any questions from folks in the audience? Yes, and if you could say who you are and where you're from, that would be great.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. Julie Minerva. A microphone. Thank you. Julie Minerva with Carpe and Clay. Good morning, and really appreciate you being here. You talked about some of the work that EPA is doing with USDA and with labor, and I'm curious, since we're looking at a more comprehensive approach to infrastructure and resiliency, if EPA has been involved in the rollout of the Department of Transportation's new PROTECT program. Has that been something that's come across your desk? Or maybe Zach?
Yeah, so that in particular has not come across my desk. We are in close communication with the Department of Transportation, primarily on Justice 40 initiative and what they're moving forward with for their equity goals. So that has been a conversation, particularly with our Office of Environmental Justice, who is charged with moving forward the Justice 40 initiative to get, if you aren't familiar, 40% of the benefits going to communities that need it most. So, and that is primarily our main connection to Department of Transportation. I'm going to have to look a little bit more into that PROTECT program. I'll also mention we're working with Housing and Urban Development on lead service line replacement and having regular conversations with them to see where those synergies are in the lead, just reducing overall lead to households in general. Thank you. I'll have to look into that.
So I'm going to go to one quickly online, and then I think we got a couple more in the room. And I think this is just to see if this is something that EPA would post at some point, but will you make public sort of the range of definitional changes for disadvantaged communities? You say 21 states have changed it. Will there be some sort of publication showing what those changes were?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. So we have out right now a kind of a baseline report. So we have a report that we prepared for Congress that summarizes where all the states were in 2021 with their definition of disadvantaged communities. And in that report, we've identified some really good definitions that the states have been very successful in ensuring that funding is going out. So we're really excited about that.
Okay.
We have a web tool that we'll be putting out hopefully very soon where we can do some tracking. So we can publish the maps of where the funding has gone to disadvantaged communities the most. So some states are reporting that information to us. The states that aren't reporting that information to us, we want to encourage them to report that information of how much of that SRF funding is going out to disadvantaged communities now. So we'll have that baseline as well.
Great.
And in preparation for the 1-year anniversary of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law signing this November, we will be putting out some level of information, likely a report on where we're at after the first year of funding and as those first requests for grant applications have come in.
Great, and we can find those reports and find a way to get them to the meeting participants. You do a question over here?
Yes, good morning, Karen. Great program, by the way. Thanks for being here today. John Bird with Miller Wendhold Capital Strategies, who represent surveying, mapping, geospatial, GIS folks. We're very interested in the coordination with the White House and Mayor Landrieu, the infrastructure coordinator. As the fiscal year kind of is drawn to a close, how are you all weighing metrics and getting the money out to state and localities for these kind of projects? And if you can kind of describe that coordination with the White House as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we are in regular contact with Mayor Landrieu and his team on the metrics. We work very closely with our administrator's office to ensure that we are tracking all the successes, that we are identifying at an early stage where those challenges are, and how are we going to address those challenges. I will say we just recently met with Mayor Landrieu and his team, Assistant Administrator Radhika Fox and I, along with Administrator Regan and Deputy Administrator Janet McCabe, to discuss the successes that we're seeing with states coming in and requesting that first year of bill funding. And to identify where some of those challenges are. We also have shared with Mayor Landrieu's team that we're expecting 21 states to change their definition of disadvantaged communities. Administrator Regan is just blown away with these results. It is way above what was expected. And what we can really tie that success to is our constant engagement with the states. So here in headquarters, we're regularly working with the states. Our regions are regularly getting information out and asking questions of the states on what their intentions are. And we're tracking that so closely so that we can ensure we're identifying where we might have some challenges, some states that are signaling that they may not be able to get the funding out, some states that are signaling that they may not be able to utilize the funding. Other states that are saying they're not going to come in just yet for that first fiscal year 2022 funding until next year. So they have until about midsummer of 23 to request the fiscal year 2022 funds, because they're using American Recovery Plan funds right now on water infrastructure, but they're using that funding to take care of some of the water infrastructure needs and also build that pipeline to really carry that SRF funding forward even to an even greater extent. So we're really excited about that. I truly consider Administrator Regan and Mayor Landrieu thought partners in the strategies, and both of them have offered that if we are seeing certain issues that they can be of assistance in, that they're here for us and they'll help.
And we've got one more in the room here. Aaron, if we could, yeah, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for being here, Ms. Dettmer. So my name is Jaden Klubeck. I'm going to be incoming associate with the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream. And I'm very interested in what you were discussing earlier about jobs and preparing people for these projects. So I'm wondering how the EPA is working with both federal, state, local governments to provide job training to help people with these different initiatives. Thank you.
Absolutely. So EPA is working on our second round of announcements for water workforce jobs grants. And those go out directly to communities. So it's now expanding that water utilities and municipalities can apply directly for those funds. It used to be that they could partner with community-based organizations and workforce development organizations, but now they can apply themselves. And we're really excited about that opportunity. We've seen some really interesting projects. I can't say great successes yet because we just had our first year, and those programs are still underway. So we're really excited. We think that they're going to be very successful, but we've seen some really interesting programs in that first year. And happy to share some more details on those projects or share those grant applications if you would like. So we're really excited about that program, but that is just such a drop in the bucket on what needs to be done to prepare the workforce to get all the work done. And it's not just contractors, but utilities do a lot of the work as well and need that workforce and that training. It's not really in EPA's wheelhouse to do workforce development and workforce training. So relying on partners like the Department of Labor, who has a good jobs initiative right now, relying on states and communities and their experiences with labor unions and the successes that they've seen in building up that workforce to, respond to the call. But I also think the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is going to be a huge game changer in signaling to communities and utilities, and most importantly, contractors, that the funding is there. I mean, this is 5 years of funding that contractors can count on. So they're going to be less adverse to build up their workforce when they know that they can count on that funding and contracts being put out for the next 5 years at least.
Well, we are just about done, so I'm going to ask Matt Chase to come in and bring us to, but first, thank you, Karen, for your time and providing such great answers and information to the audience. Really appreciate you being here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. These are my people, so.
And I'm going to turn it over to Matt Chase, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of Counties, to conclude for today.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to you and to Karen for a great discussion. It was really important. As intergovernmental partners, we really want to bring federal, state, local, and tribal officials together to solve problems. Water is something that's fundamental to our life and is something that we take for granted. We just expect the water to come out of the faucet. We expect the toilet to flush, and it's really complicated. It takes a lot of partnership and collaboration. We talk a lot about funding, but in water, it's also typically about financing. Ratepayers are often paying monthly or quarterly bills to actually finance or fund these projects. And EPA is really important in that gap financing. So many of these projects are so expensive that local communities could not do it without a federal partner. And so it's great to have folks like Karen who have on-the-ground experience in the city of Milwaukee and working with surrounding jurisdictions. It's great that the administrator comes from the state level and really understands what we need to do as a nation. And so we just wanted to thank the Bipartisan Policy Center, who's a wonderful solutions-oriented think tank that works with us to bring people together on issues that shouldn't be partisan. Investing in water, wastewater, and don't forget stormwater, which is really important, is fundamental to our country and our competitiveness. So we want to thank you. And we also wanted to continue to highlight the importance of helping our disadvantaged communities. You see places like Eastern Kentucky, which I worked a lot in over my career, they really don't have anywhere to go with their water. And so it's very expensive. They're in a mountain terrain, very impoverished communities. So they really struggle with getting access to water for economic development, for their quality of life. And then you throw a natural disaster on top of it. And it's really complex and it's really expensive. So these conversations at the federal level are really important to bringing us together. We want solution-oriented partners like EPA to help us solve problems on the ground. And we really just want to extend that appreciation. And finally, as EPA works on rules like lead and copper, on PFAS, which is a major emerging issue, things like climate resilience, we have to understand that we share these values. We want to make these investments. We want to make our communities better, but they're really expensive. They take time, and we want to do it right because our country hasn't always done it right, and we want to work together. And just as we close, just remind folks that half of our counties in this country are growing, and half of them are stagnant or declining. And I bring that up because growth is expensive, and also when your economy's lagging behind, you often don't have the resources to invest. And so as we work with our federal partners, we want to make sure that we can tailor our solutions to the local need. Again, some are high growth areas that need it for growth. Other areas have declining number of people to pay for this costly infrastructure over 20, 30 years. And so we just have to be mindful that we need local flexibility. So with that, we'll close. And again, thank Karen and EPA for being such great partners and being willing to join us today, and thanking our audience as well. So thank you again.